Millionaire visits son's grave, then sees a black waitress crying with twins. He knelt at his son's marble headstone in Boston's Mount Auburn Cemetery, but the soft weeping behind him made him turn, and there she stood, clutching two small hands, tears streaming down her face as she whispered, "Thank you, baby boy, for sending us help." Before we get deep into the story, please let me know in the comment where you're watching from. Hit subscribe if you're hooked in and ready to enjoy the story, because tomorrow I have another beautiful story to share with you and I don't want you to miss it for anything. The October wind cut through Alexander Hartford's cashmere coat like it was paper, but he barely felt it. Nothing penetrated the numbness anymore. Not the cold, not the sympathetic glances from his board members, not even the stack of condolence letters gathering dust on his mahogany desk in downtown Boston's financial district. He stood before the pristine marble headstone, its gold lettering catching the late afternoon sun. Benjamin James Hartford, beloved son 1995 to 2023. I am 28 years old. Gone in a car crash on the Mass Pike because he'd been rushing to meet his father for a dinner that Alexander had canceled at the last minute. Again. "I'm sorry, Ben," Alexander whispered, his voice cracking like autumn leaves. His perfectly manicured hands trembled as he placed white lilies, Ben's favorite, at the base of the stone. "I'm so damn sorry." The Fortune 500 CEO who commanded boardrooms and owned half of Beacon Hill couldn't command his grief. 6 months since the funeral, and the guilt still clawed at his chest every morning when he woke up in his empty Lewisburg Square mansion. What do you think drives someone to visit a grave daily? Have you ever felt that kind of regret? Share your thoughts below. 3 miles away in Roxbury, Amara Johnson was fighting a different kind of battle. "Mommy tired," 4-year-old Zion tugged at her black waitress uniform, his twin sister Zara clinging to her other leg as she tried to count tips from her double shift at Murphy's Diner in South Boston. "I know, baby. Just a few more minutes." Amara's voice was hoarse from 12 hours of taking orders and forcing smiles. The crumpled bills in her hand added up to $63. After rent, daycare, and groceries, maybe she'd have enough left for the tea pass to get to work tomorrow. Maybe. She glanced at the framed photo on their small kitchen table. A young man in a Red Sox jersey, grinning beside her at Fenway Park. The twins had his eyes, his stubborn chin. They'd never meet him, but they carried pieces of him in every laugh, every tantrum, every sleepy whisper of "Mama." "Can we see Ben?" Zara asked, rubbing her eyes. Amara's heart clenched. The twins were too young to understand death, but somehow they always asked to visit Ben when the world felt too heavy. Maybe children sensed when their mother needed to remember love existed. "Yes, sweetheart. We'll go see Ben." The bus ride to Mount Auburn Cemetery cost precious dollars, but some things mattered more than money. As they walked through the iron gates, Zion and Zara ran ahead, their small feet crunching through fallen leaves. They knew the way by heart, past the old oak tree, around the bend, to the beautiful white stone that seemed to glow in the fading light. But today someone was already there. Amara froze, pulling the twins close. A tall man in an expensive coat knelt before Ben's grave, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Even from behind, everything about him screamed wealth. The perfect posture, the tailored clothes, the way he moved like he owned the world. This was him. The father Ben had talked about with such complicated love. The man who'd been too busy building an empire to build a relationship with his son. The man who had no idea his son had been in love with a black waitress from Roxbury. The man who didn't know he had twin grandchildren. Alexander stood slowly, wiping his eyes before turning. His breath caught when he saw them, a young black woman with children standing respectfully at a distance. Her uniform suggested long hours and hard work, but her eyes held a gentle strength that reminded him of someone. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't mean to." "No, it's okay." Amara's voice was barely above a whisper. "We come here sometimes. To visit." Something in her tone made him pause. Not just sympathy but familiarity. Like she belonged here too. "Did you know Ben?" The question escaped before he could stop it. Tears welled in Amara's eyes. The twins pressed closer to her legs, sensing the emotion in the air. "Yes," she whispered. "I knew Ben." The way she said his son's name with such tenderness, such loss, made Alexander's chest tighten. There was a story here, written in the careful way she held herself, in the protective circle of her arms around the children. "Mommy, can we give Ben the flowers?" Zion asked, holding up a small bunch of dandelions they'd picked on the walk. Alexander watched, stunned, as the little boy approached the headstone with the reverence of someone who'd done this before. The child placed the wilted dandelions next to Alexander's expensive lilies, then pressed a small kiss to the marble. "We miss you, Ben," Zara whispered. "Mama cries sometimes, but she says you're watching us." The world tilted. Alexander gripped the back of a nearby bench, his mind racing. These children spoke to Ben's grave like they knew him. Like they loved him. Like, "Who are you?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Amara met his eyes for the first time, and Alexander saw Ben staring back at him. Not in her features, but in the depth of love and loss that seemed too big for one person to carry. "I'm Amara Johnson," she said simply. "And these are Ben's children." The words hit Alexander like a physical blow. He staggered backward, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. Grandchildren. Ben had children. Beautiful, perfect children who would never know their father because Alexander had been too proud, too busy, too late. "That's impossible," he whispered, but even as he said it, he saw the truth in Zion's stubborn chin, in Zara's gentle eyes, in the way they moved with Ben's unconscious grace. Amara lifted her chin, protective fire flashing in her eyes. "Believe what you want. We don't need anything from you. We never have." She gathered the twins, preparing to leave, but Alexander's broken voice stopped her. "Please, please don't go. What secrets do you think Amara is hiding? How would you react if you discovered you had grandchildren you never knew about? Let me know in the comments." The silence stretched between them like a chasm, filled only by the whisper of wind through ancient oaks and the distant hum of traffic on Mount Auburn Street. Alexander's world had just shattered, and he stood among the pieces, trying to understand how his son, his brilliant, complicated son, had lived an entire life he knew nothing about. "How long?" His voice came out raw, barely recognizable. "How long were you?" 3 years. Amara's answer cut through the air like glass. "We were together for 3 years." 3 years. Alexander felt his legs give way, and he sank onto the cold granite bench behind him. 3 years of Ben's life, love, laughter, the creation of these beautiful children. And Alexander had missed it all. Been too consumed with quarterly reports and board meetings to notice his son had found what Alexander himself had lost when Elizabeth died. "Daddy sad," Zion whispered, tugging on Amara's coat. At 4, he could sense the adult emotions swirling around them, the weight of secrets and sorrow. "Not daddy, baby," Amara murmured, but her voice cracked. Because that's exactly what Alexander was, whether he knew it or not. Whether he deserved it or not. Alexander looked up at the sound, his gray eyes, Ben's eyes, focusing on the little boy with desperate intensity. "You look just like him," he breathed. "God, you look exactly like Ben when he was your age." Ben was our daddy," Zara announced with 4-year-old certainty, stepping closer to the stranger who seemed to know their secret father. "Mama says he lives in heaven now, but he still loves us very much." The simple truth of it broke something inside Alexander. He pressed his hands to his face, his shoulders shaking with the force of grief he'd kept bottled for months. Not just grief for Ben, but for everything he'd lost. Time, chances, the opportunity to know these children, to see his son as a father. "He never told me," Alexander whispered through his fingers. "Why didn't he tell me about you? About them?" Amara's laugh was bitter, sharp enough to cut. "Really? You're asking me that?" She knelt down, gathering the twins close, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper. "When was the last time you had an actual conversation with Ben? When was the last time he felt safe enough to share something real with you?" The words hit their target with surgical precision. Alexander's hands fell from his face, and he stared at this young woman who saw right through his expensive facade to the failure beneath. "I loved him," he said desperately. "Ben was everything to me. After his mother died, he was all I had." "No." Amara stood slowly, her dark eyes blazing with protective fury. "Money was all you had. Work was all you had. Ben was just expected to fit into whatever space you had left over. And there was never any space left over, was there?" Alexander wanted to deny it, to defend himself, but the words turned to ash in his mouth. Because she was right. Even now, standing in the cemetery, his phone had buzzed twice with messages from his assistant about tomorrow's merger meeting. "He used to wait for you," Amara continued, her voice softer now but no less devastating. "Every birthday, every Christmas, every time you promised dinner or a game or just time. He'd get dressed up, excited, believing maybe this time would be different. And then you'd cancel. Emergency meeting. Important client. Always something more important than him." "That's not," Alexander started, but Zara's small voice interrupted him. "Mama, why are you crying?" Tears were streaming down Amara's face, years of watching Ben's heartbreak finally pouring out. "I'm okay, baby girl. Just talking about Ben." Alexander watched this young woman comfort her children, his grandchildren, and saw a grace he'd never possessed. Even in her pain, she put them first. The way Ben should have been put first. The way Alexander had failed to do. "He talked about you," Amara said quietly, wiping her eyes. "Even after everything, he still loved you. Still hoped you'd see him. Really see him." "I did see him," Alexander protested weakly. "No. You saw your heir. Your successor. The person you wanted him to be." Amara's voice was gentle now, but her words still cut deep. "You never saw the man who spent Saturday mornings teaching these babies to make pancakes, who learned Spanish so he could read to the kids at the community center in Roxbury, who worked 2 jobs so I could go to nursing school, even though we both knew you would have paid for it with pocket change if he'd just asked." The image she painted was foreign to Alexander. His son in a small kitchen, flower in his hair, surrounded by laughter and love. His son in a world Alexander had never bothered to explore. Why didn't he ask? Alexander's voice was barely audible. Amara looked at him like he'd asked why the sun rose in the east. "Because he knew what you'd say. Ben, you're throwing your life away. This girl is just using you for money. These children will hold you back from your potential." "Am I wrong?" Alexander opened his mouth to deny it, then closed it again. Because no, she wasn't wrong. Those exact words had formed in his mind the moment he'd learned of their existence. He protected us from you, Amara continued. From your judgment, your disapproval, your ability to make him feel small. He said his father was brilliant at making money but had forgotten how to make anything else matter. I would have helped, Alexander said desperately. If I'd known about you, about the children, I would have. What would you do? Thrown money at us? Set up trust funds? Maybe bought them into the right schools? Amara shook her head. Ben didn't want your money. He wanted your time, your attention, your approval, the things you never learned how to give. Alexander stood up abruptly, pacing to his son's headstone. He placed his hand on the cold marble, as if he could somehow reach through stone and earth to the boy he'd failed. I don't know how, he whispered. I never learned how to be anything but successful. My father was the same way. And his father before him. We build empires, not relationships. Then maybe it's time to learn something new. Alexander turned to find Zara standing beside him, her small hand reaching for his. Without thinking, he knelt down to her level, and she placed her tiny palm against his cheek. You have sad eyes like Mama, she observed with 4-year-old wisdom. Ben says sad people need hugs. And then she wrapped her small arms around his neck, and Alexander Hartford, CEO, Millionaire, Master of the Universe, completely fell apart. The silence stretched between them like a chasm, filled only by the rustling of October leaves and the distant hum of Boston traffic beyond the cemetery gates. Alexander stood frozen, his world rewritten in the space of a heartbeat, while Amara clutched her children's hands like anchors in a storm. Daddy! Zion looked up at his mother with confused eyes. Why is the sad man crying? Alexander's breath hitched. The word Daddy hung in the air, a title these children would never use for Ben, a role Alexander had failed at spectacularly. He watched as Amara knelt to the twins' level, her movements careful and deliberate. Sometimes grown-ups get very sad when they miss someone they love, she whispered, smoothing Zara's curls. Just like we miss Ben. But Ben sends us dreams, Zara said matter-of-factly. He told me in a dream that we'd find help soon. Maybe the sad man needs dreams too. Alexander felt something crack open in his chest. These children spoke of his son with such natural love, such acceptance of magic and hope that his cynical businessman's heart had forgotten existed. I don't understand, he said, his voice rough. Ben never mentioned. How long were you together? Amara stood slowly, her spine straight with defensive pride. 2 years. We met at Northeastern University when I was finishing my nursing degree. He was auditing psychology classes for fun. Said he wanted to understand people better, not just balance sheets. The detail hit Alexander like a slap. Ben had been taking psychology classes? His son, who was supposed to be learning the family business, had been secretly studying human nature while Alexander pushed merger deals and profit margins. He never told me about you, Alexander said, and immediately regretted the accusation in his voice. Amara's eyes flashed. Because he knew exactly what you'd think. A poor black girl from Roxbury with a waitress job? Not exactly Hartford family material, right? The words stung because they held a grain of truth Alexander didn't want to acknowledge. He'd spent years grooming Ben to marry within their social circle. Charity galas, yacht club connections, the kind of strategic partnerships that built empires. That's not. Isn't it? Amara's voice rose. then immediately dropped as she glanced at the twins. Ben told me about the women you introduced him to. The suitable ones. He said you had his whole life planned out, and none of those plans included love. Alexander flinched. How many dinner parties had he orchestrated, hoping Ben would connect with a senator's daughter or a pharmaceutical heiress? How many times had he dismissed Ben's reluctance as immaturity? He loved you, Amara continued, her voice breaking. So much that it scared him. He said you'd never accept us, never accept them. She gestured to Zion and Zara, who were now picking up acorns and arranging them in small piles. So he was saving money, planning to tell you everything when we got married. When he had enough to support us without your approval. The revelation hit Alexander like a physical blow. Ben had been planning independence, planning a life that didn't revolve around Hartford Industries or family expectations. He'd been choosing love over legacy, and Alexander had been too blind to see it. The accident, Alexander whispered. He was coming to dinner with me that night. Amara nodded, tears streaming down her face. To tell you about us. I begged him to wait, but he said he was tired of hiding. Tired of pretending we didn't exist. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. He never made it to the restaurant. The weight of missed chances crashed over Alexander. If he'd been less demanding, less controlling, maybe Ben would have felt safe sharing his heart earlier. Maybe that dinner wouldn't have felt so urgent, so fraught with anxiety that Ben had driven too fast on rain-slick roads. I killed him, Alexander said, the words scraping his throat raw. No, Amara said sharply, surprising him. Don't you dare take that from him. Ben made his own choices. He chose to drive that night because he chose love. He chose us. Don't be courageous about your guilt. The fierce protectiveness in her voice reminded Alexander of his late wife. The way she defended Ben's dreams when Alexander pushed too hard, too fast. But Elena had died when Ben was 15, taking with her the gentle balance that had kept their family human. Mama, look. Zara ran over with a perfect red leaf. It's heart-shaped. Like the ones Ben used to find for us. Alexander stared at the child, his granddaughter, as she pressed the leaf into Amara's palm. Ben found leaves for them? Every visit to the park, Amara said softly. He said hearts were everywhere if you knew how to look. The twins have a whole collection at home. She paused, studying Alexander's face. He talked about you, you know. Even when he was angry, even when he felt abandoned, he still loved you. Still hoped you'd see him for who he really was. The admission broke something loose in Alexander's chest. I failed him. I failed as a father. Yeah, Amara said bluntly. You did. But that doesn't erase the good parts. Ben remembered fishing trips when he was little, bedtime stories about brave nights, the way you taught him to throw a curveball in the backyard of your Beacon Hill house. Alexander closed his eyes, remembering those moments. Before the company consumed everything, before grief over Elena's death made him bury himself in work, before success became more important than presence. I want to know them, he said suddenly, looking at Zion and Zara. My grandchildren. I want to know everything Ben never got to tell me. Amara stepped back, pulling the twins closer. You can't just decide that. You can't waltz in here with your money and your guilt and expect instant access to our lives. I'm not trying to buy anything. Aren't you? Amara's voice turned sharp. That's what rich people do, isn't it? Throw money at problems until they disappear. Well, we're not a problem to be solved. We're a family. Broken, struggling, but whole without you. The dismissal stung, but Alexander recognized the armor she'd built around herself and her children. He'd done the same thing after Elena died. Pushed away anything that might hurt, anything that might require vulnerability. "I don't want to fix anything," he said quietly. "I just want to understand who my son became, who he loved, who he would have been as a father." Amara studied his face for a long moment. "You'll hurt them," she said finally. "People like you always do. You'll get bored or uncomfortable, or your fancy friends will say something, and you'll disappear. They're just babies. They don't understand rejection." "I would never." "You rejected their father for being human instead of perfect," Amara said. "Why should they be any different?" The words landed like a physical blow because they were true. Alexander had spent years pushing Ben toward an impossible standard, loving the idea of his son more than the reality of who Ben actually was. "Mama, why are you sad?" Zion tugged at Amara's uniform. "Did we say something wrong?" Amara knelt and pulled both children into a fierce hug. "No, babies. You're perfect. You're always perfect." Alexander watched the embrace and saw what Ben had seen. Not just a woman, but a mother fierce enough to fight the world for her children's happiness. A woman strong enough to raise twins alone while carrying grief and love in equal measure. "I should go," Amara said, standing. "Come on, babies. Say goodbye to Ben." The twins obediently kissed their small hands and pressed them to the headstone. "Love you, Ben," they chorused. As they walked away, Alexander called out desperately, "Please. How can I reach you?" Amara paused without turning around. "You can't. That's the point." Alexander stood alone beside his son's grave, watching his only connection to Ben's secret life disappear into the maze of cemetery paths. The silence felt different now, not empty, but full of questions, regrets, and the echo of small voices calling a dead man Ben with perfect, uncomplicated love. He pressed his palm to the cold marble headstone. "Help me, Ben. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to be what they need." The wind rustled through the oak trees, and for just a moment, Alexander could swear he heard his son's voice in the whisper of leaves. "Start by showing up, Dad. Just show up. But show up where?" He knew nothing about Amara Johnson except her name, her uniform, and the fierce love that armored her against him. He didn't even know where she lived, where she worked, how to bridge the chasm his own failures had created. All he had were 2 dandelions wilting beside expensive lilies, and the memory of his granddaughter's voice saying Ben sent dreams about finding help. Maybe it was time to believe in dreams again. The fluorescent lights of Boston Children's Hospital buzzed overhead like angry wasps as Alexander paced the cramped waiting room. His Italian leather shoes squeaked against the linoleum floor, a sound that would have irritated him in his boardroom but now felt like a lifeline, something to focus on besides the crushing weight in his chest. Amara sat rigid in a plastic chair, her waitress uniform wrinkled and stained with Zara's blood. Her hands hadn't stopped shaking since they'd loaded her daughter into the ambulance outside Fenway Park, where what should have been a magical afternoon had turned into every parent's nightmare. "Mrs. Johnson." A young resident approached, clipboard in hand. "Zara's stable. The concussion is mild, but we need to monitor her overnight. Hospital policy requires a parent or guardian to stay." "I'll stay," Amara said immediately, though Alexander could see the exhaustion pulling at her features. She'd already worked a double shift before their impromptu trip to the Red Sox game. His desperate attempt to connect with Ben's children after that shattering moment at the cemetery 3 days ago. "I can arrange a private room," Alexander interjected, reaching for his wallet. "Whatever she needs." "We don't need your charity," Amara snapped, but her voice cracked with exhaustion. The resident looked between them uncertainly. I'm sorry, but visiting hours end at 9. Only one person can stay overnight, and the other will need to. I'm staying too, Alexander said firmly. Zion is my responsibility. Sir, you're not listed as an emergency contact. He's their grandfather, Amara said quietly, the words falling like stones into still water. It was the first time she'd acknowledged the relationship aloud, and Alexander felt something crack open in his chest. The resident nodded and moved away, leaving them trapped in their bubble of shared terror and unspoken truths. Zion had fallen asleep against Alexander's shoulder hours ago, his small body warm and trusting in a way that made Alexander's throat close up. The boy had cried for his mama when the paramedics first arrived, but somehow when Alexander had climbed into the ambulance and held out his arms, Zion had reached for him. She was trying to catch a foul ball, Amara whispered, staring at her hands. Just like Ben used to. He always said he'd catch one for me someday. A tear slipped down her cheek. She's so much like him. Fearless and stubborn and beautiful, Alexander finished softly. They both are. Amara glanced at him, something shifting in her expression. For 3 days, she'd held him at arm's length, accepting his awkward attempts at connection with cool politeness. But the crisis had a way of stripping away pretenses. You don't have to stay, she said, but there was no heat in it anymore. I know you have important things. Nothing is more important than this. The words came out more forcefully than he intended. Nothing has ever been more important than this. A security guard wandered by, his radio crackling with coded messages. In the distance, someone was crying, a mother, maybe, facing her own crisis. The hospital was a cathedral of human frailty, and in its harsh light, the barriers between them seemed absurd. I should call my supervisor, Amara said, pulling out a phone with a cracked screen. Tell them I can't work tomorrow. Don't. Alexander's voice was gentle but firm. Let me handle it. You don't understand. I can't afford to lose this job. The twins need their mother, Alexander interrupted. And their mother needs to be here, not serving coffee to strangers at 5 in the morning. Amara's eyes flashed. That's what I do, Mr. Hartford. That's who I am. I work for what we have. I know. Alexander adjusted Zion's sleeping form more carefully. Ben told me once that he'd never met anyone with a stronger work ethic than his mother. I thought he was talking about his nanny. The admission hung between them like a bridge half-built. He talked about his mother? Amara asked softly. All the time. How she worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table. How she never missed a school play, even when she was dead on her feet. How she taught him that love wasn't about what you could buy someone, but what you were willing to sacrifice for them. Amara's breath caught. He said that. He said a lot of things I was too arrogant to hear. Alexander's voice was rough with regret, including how much he loved you. A nurse walked by, her sneakers silent on the polished floor. Somewhere in the pediatric wing, Zara was sleeping under white sheets, probably dreaming of baseball games and her father she'd never meet. Why didn't he tell you about us? Amara asked. About the twins. Alexander was quiet for a long moment, stroking Zion's dark hair. Because I gave him every reason to believe I wouldn't approve. I spent his whole life teaching him that our family had standards, expectations. I made him think that loving someone like you, he stopped, horrified by his own words. Someone like me, Amara repeated flatly. Poor. Black. Not good enough for a Hartford. No. Alexander's voice was fierce. Someone real. Someone who would love him for who he was, not what he could buy them. Someone who would make him choose between his heart and his inheritance. The truth of it settled between them like snow, cold and clean. He was going to tell you, Amara said finally. The night he died. He called me before he left for dinner, said he was tired of hiding us. Said it was time you met your grandchildren, whether you liked it or not. Alexander's eyes burned. The dinner I canceled. The dinner he never made it to. They sat in silence, united by their different kinds of guilt. The waiting room was nearly empty now, just a few other families keeping their own vigils. The vending machines hummed in the corner, their bright lights promising comfort in packages of sugar and salt. I dream about him sometimes, Amara whispered. He's holding the twins, teaching them to throw a curveball in the backyard we never had. He looks so happy, so proud. He would be proud, Alexander said. Look what you've raised. Look how brave they are, how kind. Zion held my hand in the ambulance and told me not to be scared because his mama says angels watch over people who love each other. Amara smiled through her tears. That sounds like him. A doctor appeared in the doorway, and they both tensed, but he was just passing through to another emergency. False alarm. They settled back into their chairs, the weight of shared vigil pressing them closer together despite themselves. I don't know how to do this, Alexander admitted. Be a grandfather. Be family. Neither do I, Amara said. I never had a father. Ben was going to be different for them. Better. Maybe we can figure it out together. The words surprised them both. Outside, Boston glittered in the darkness. Beacon Hill with its gas lamps and cobblestones, the North End with its narrow streets and old-world charm, the harbor where ships had once brought dreamers and refugees to the city of revolution and reinvention. I can't let you buy us, Amara said quietly. I won't be your charity case. And I can't let pride cost me another chance, Alexander replied. I won't lose them the way I lost Ben. Zion stirred in his arms, mumbling something about ice cream and baseball. His small hand curled around Alexander's finger with unconscious trust, and Alexander felt his carefully constructed walls crumble a little more. What happens tomorrow? Amara asked. I don't know, Alexander said honestly. But I know I want to find out. In the distance, a church bell chimed midnight. A new day was beginning, full of possibilities neither of them could have imagined a week ago. They were still strangers in many ways, separated by race, class, and decades of different struggles. But grief and love had strange powers, and sometimes the most unlikely people became family when the world demanded it. Alexander looked down at the sleeping boy in his arms, then at the woman who'd loved his son enough to raise these miracles alone. Maybe redemption wasn't about undoing the past. Maybe it was about having the courage to build something new from the pieces. Outside Zara's room, they would keep their vigil together. Two broken people learning that sometimes the best families were the ones you never saw coming. 3 weeks had passed since that first encounter at the cemetery. 3 weeks of careful conversations, tentative dinners at family restaurants in Cambridge, and moments where Alexander glimpsed the life Ben had built in secret. Tonight, Amara had finally agreed to bring the twins to his Beacon Hill mansion, their first time stepping into their grandfather's world. The children were asleep now in the guest room, exhausted from exploring the grand staircase and marveling at the crystal chandeliers. Alexander sat across from Amara in his private study, surrounded by leather-bound books and oil paintings worth more than most people's homes. But his attention was fixed on the worn shoebox she'd placed on the mahogany table between them. "I wasn't sure if I should show you these," Amara said, her fingers tracing the box's edges. "Ben made me promise to keep them safe, but he never said I couldn't share them." Alexander's hands trembled as she lifted the lid. Inside were hundreds of photographs, letters, and small mementos, the secret archive of his son's hidden life. The first photograph stole his breath. Ben at Boston Common, laughing as he pushed a pregnant Amara on a swing. Her hands rested on her rounded belly, her face glowing with happiness. The date stamp read March 2019. "He was so excited when we found out about the twins," Amara whispered. "Scared but excited. He said he wanted to be the kind of father he never had." The words cut deep, but Alexander kept looking. Ben teaches the twins to walk in the public garden. Ben reading bedtime stories in what looked like a small apartment. Ben was wearing a world's greatest dad shirt that was clearly handmade with tiny handprints. "Why didn't he tell me?" Alexander's voice broke. "Why didn't he bring you home?" Amara was quiet for a long moment, studying her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice carried years of hurt. "He tried. Do you remember Thanksgiving 2018? Alexander frowned, searching his memory. "He called and said he wanted to bring someone special to dinner. I told him I had the Vanderbilt merger to finalize and we'd reschedule. He'd been planning to introduce me for months. He bought me a dress, the first expensive thing I'd ever owned. He was so nervous, practicing what he'd say." Amara pulled out a folded piece of paper. "He wrote it all down." Alexander unfolded the paper with shaking hands. Ben's familiar handwriting filled the page. "Dad, I want you to meet Amara Johnson. She's brilliant, kind, and she makes me want to be better than I thought I could be. She's from Roxbury, she works 3 jobs to support herself, and she doesn't care about our money. She loves me for who I am, not what I have. I know she's not what you expected, but she's everything I need. Please give her a chance. Please give us your blessing." Tears blurred Alexander's vision. He never got to say it. When you canceled, something broke in him. He said he'd been fooling himself thinking you'd accept us. A black girl from the hood with a rich white boy from Beacon Hill? He knew how the story would go. "That's not, I wouldn't have. Wouldn't you?" Amara's voice was gentle but firm. "Be honest, Mr. Hartford. If Ben had walked through your door with a pregnant black waitress in 2018, what would your first thought have been?" Alexander opened his mouth to protest, then closed it. The shameful truth sat heavy in his chest. He would have worried about the company, about appearances, about gold diggers and scandal. He would have handled it like a business problem to be managed, not a love to be celebrated. "You're right," he whispered. "God help me, you're right." Amara continued pulling items from the box. Birth certificates with Ben's name listed as father. Hospital bracelets from the twins' delivery. A keychain that read, "Daddy's Little Angels." "He was there for everything," she said. "Every doctor's appointment, every sleepless night, every first word. He worked 2 jobs to help support us, bartending at night after his day job at the tech startup. He never wanted your money, just your acceptance. He had his own job. But I thought that he was living off your trust fund?" Amara shook her head. "He never touched it after we got together. Said he wanted to earn his own way, prove he could be a real man, not just Alexander Hartford's spoiled son." Alexander felt like he was learning about a stranger who happened to share his DNA. The Ben in these photographs and letters was responsible, devoted, mature in ways that shamed him. "There's more," Amara said softly. She pulled out a manila envelope marked, "For Dad," in Ben's handwriting. "He wrote you a letter before the twins were born. I think he always hoped someday." Alexander's hands shook as he opened the envelope. The letter was dated 6 months before Ben's death. "Dad, if you're reading this, it means Amara decided you deserved to know the truth. I have children, your grandchildren. Twin boy and girl, Zion and Zara. They're everything to me, just like I once hoped to be everything to you. I know I disappointed you. I know you wanted me to take over the company, marry someone from our social circle, and live the life you planned for me. But I found something better than a plan. I found love. Real love, the kind that makes you want to be worthy of it. Amara doesn't know I'm writing this. She thinks I gave up on you, but I never did. I just got tired of waiting for you to have time for me. By the time I realized I should have fought harder, it felt too late. My children will grow up knowing their father loves them. They'll never wonder if work is more important than they are. But I hope someday they'll also know their grandfather. Not the CEO or the millionaire, just the man who raised me, flawed as we both are. If anything happens to me, please take care of them. Not with money, Amara's too proud for that, but with presence. Show up, Dad. Just show up. Your son, Ben. P.S. Zion has a stubborn streak. Zara has Mom's gentle heart. You'd love them if you let yourself. Asterisk. Alexander read the letter 3 times before the words finally sank in. His son had forgiven him before Alexander even knew he needed forgiveness. Ben had been preparing for reconciliation while Alexander had been building walls. "He never stopped talking about you," Amara said quietly. "Even when he was hurt, even when he felt rejected. He'd tell the twins stories about their grandfather who built castles in the sky and helped people with his magic money." "Magic money," Alexander repeated, his voice thick. "That's what he called your businesses. He said you were like a wizard who could make schools and hospitals appear. The twins think you're a superhero." Alexander looked at the photographs scattered across his desk, a life he'd missed, love he'd rejected without even knowing it existed, grandchildren who thought he hung the moon despite never meeting him. "I failed him," he whispered. "I failed all of you." "You failed then," Amara said. But Ben believed in second chances. He said forgiveness was the only magic that actually worked. Outside, Boston's skyline glittered in the darkness. The empire Alexander had built while his real treasure was hidden in plain sight. In his guest room, 2 little souls slept peacefully, carrying their father's hopes and their grandfather's legacy without knowing how precious they were. "What happens now?" Alexander asked. Amara began packing the photographs back into the shoebox, but she left one on the table. Ben holding the twins on their first Christmas, all 3 of them laughing at something beyond the camera's view. "Now," she said, "you decide what kind of grandfather you want to be." The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Alexander's kitchen, casting golden light across a scene that would have been unimaginable a month ago. Zion sat perched on the marble counter, flour dusting his dark curls as he helped Alexander measure ingredients for pancakes. Zara had claimed the breakfast nook as her coloring headquarters, her tongue poking out in concentration as she worked on a drawing of what she called Grandpa's big house. "More vanilla, Grandpa Alex," Zion declared, dumping half the bottle into the bowl before Alexander could stop him. "Well," Alexander chuckled, catching the bottle, I guess we're making vanilla pancakes today." The easy laughter surprised him. When was the last time these walls had heard genuine joy? Amara emerged from the guest bathroom, her hair still damp from the shower. 3 weeks of regular meals and decent sleep had restored some of the glow to her skin, though she still moved with the careful wariness of someone expecting the dream to shatter. "You don't have to cook for us every morning," she said, but there was less resistance in her voice than before. "The twins are getting spoiled." "Good," Alexander replied, not looking up from the griddle. "They deserve to be spoiled. There." He paused, his voice growing thick with emotion. "They're all I have left of him." The kitchen fell quiet except for the sizzle of batter. Over the past weeks, they'd established this rhythm. Moments of warmth followed by the careful acknowledgement of their shared loss. Ben's absence was a thread woven through every conversation, every gesture of kindness. "Mama, look." Zara held up her drawing, a stick-figure family standing in front of a large house. "It's you, me, Zion, and Grandpa Alex. And there's Ben in the sky watching us." Amara's breath caught. In the drawing, Ben was a smiling figure surrounded by clouds, his arms stretched wide as if blessing the scene below. The child's innocent faith that love transcended death brought tears to both adults' eyes. "It's beautiful, baby," Amara whispered, kneeling beside her daughter. "Ben would love it." Alexander set down his spatula and joined them, studying the drawing with the seriousness it deserved. "May I keep this, Zara? I'd like to frame it for my office." The little girl beamed. "Really? In your big important building?" "The most important spot on my desk," Alexander promised. Later that morning, after the twins had settled into their new routine of educational cartoons in the sunroom, a routine Alexander had researched extensively to ensure it was developmentally appropriate, he and Amara found themselves alone in the garden. The October air carried the scent of dying leaves and the last stubborn roses. Alexander had never paid attention to his garden before, but Amara had mentioned loving flowers, so he'd suddenly started noticing every bloom, every season's change. "This is temporary, you know," Amara said quietly, watching the twins through the window. "Us being here. I don't want them getting too attached." Alexander's hands stilled on the coffee mug he'd been warming between his palms. "And what about you? Are you getting too attached?" She turned to study his face, this man who'd become an unexpected constant in their lives. The grief had carved new lines around his eyes, but something else was growing there too. Hope, maybe. Purpose. "I think I already am," she admitted. "That's what scares me." "Why does it scare you?" Amara was quiet for a long moment, watching a cardinal land on the bird feeder Alexander had installed after Zion expressed fascination with the flying red one. "Because people like you don't stay in the lives of people like me," she said finally. "Because kindness from your world always comes with conditions I can't meet. Because my children deserve stability, not a grandfather who might decide we're too complicated when the novelty wears off." The words hung between them like a challenge. Alexander set down his mug and turned to face her fully. "Do you know what I did the day Ben died?" he asked quietly. Amara shook her head. "I was in a meeting about acquiring a hotel chain in Chicago. My assistant buzzed me 3 times. Ben was trying to reach me. I told her to take a message because the deal was too important to interrupt." Alexander's voice cracked. "The most important deal of my life, I called it. $47 billion. He looked out at the garden, seeing not the manicured lawn but the sterile hospital corridor where he'd identified his son's body. You know what I'd give to trade every dollar I have for one more conversation with him? One more chance to say yes when he asked me to dinner? One more opportunity to meet the woman he loved and the children he was so proud of. Amara's eyes widened. He told you about us? In his last voicemail. The one I was too busy to take. Alexander's hands clenched into fists. He said he had something wonderful to share. Said he'd found his family and wanted me to meet them. Said he finally understood what love meant. Tears rolled down Amara's cheeks as she reached into her purse, pulling out her phone. With trembling fingers, she scrolled through old messages and showed him the screen. I'm going to tell him about you and the twins tonight. I know he'll love you as much as I do. Our family's about to get bigger, baby. I can feel it. The timestamp showed the message had been sent 20 minutes before the accident. Alexander stared at the words. Ben's last message to the woman he loved, full of hope and joy and the certainty that love could bridge any gap. The irony was devastating and beautiful. Ben had been rushing to share news that would have healed them all. He was so excited, Amara whispered. He'd been planning it for weeks. He bought a suit, practiced his speech in the mirror. He kept saying you two just needed to really see each other. What do you think Ben would say if he could see his father and the woman he loved finally connecting? Share your thoughts about second chances below. They sat in silence, both lost in the weight of what might have been. Then Zion's laughter drifted from the house, followed by Zara's delighted squeal as they discovered something fascinating on their nature show. Those children, Alexander said softly, they're not a complication. They're not temporary. They're the most important thing in my world now. He turned to Amara, his eyes fierce with conviction. I know I can't replace what you've lost. I know I can't undo the year of struggle you've faced alone. But I can promise you this, I will never be too busy for them. I will never make them feel unwanted. I will never abandon them the way I abandoned their father. Amara studied his face, seeing past the wealth and privilege to the broken man underneath. She saw Ben's stubbornness, his capacity for fierce love once his heart was engaged. They'll break your heart sometimes, she warned. Children do that. They'll test every boundary, question every rule. They'll need you at 3 a.m. and during important meetings and when your world is falling apart. Good, Alexander said simply. My heart's been broken anyway. At least this way, it'll be broken by love instead of loss. Something shifted in Amara's expression, a wall finally cracking. Ben used to say that love wasn't about finding someone perfect. It was about finding someone worth fighting for. Smart man, Alexander said. Was he worth fighting for? Every day, she whispered. Then maybe we're worth fighting for too. All of us. This strange, complicated family we're becoming. Inside the house, Zion appeared at the window, pressing his face against the glass and fogging it with his breath. He drew a smiley face in the condensation, then waved enthusiastically at them. Grandpa Alex. Mama. Come see. There's a butterfly on TV that looks just like the one in the garden. Alexander stood, extending his hand to Amara. Shall we go see this miraculous butterfly? For the first time since they'd met, Amara took his hand without hesitation. Yes, she said. Let's go see what wonders our children have discovered. As they walked toward the house together, neither noticed the cardinal that had been watching from the bird feeder. It took flight, circling once above their heads before disappearing into the clear Boston sky, a flash of red against the blue, like a blessing, like a sign, like love finding its way home at last. The crystal chandelier in Alexander's dining room had witnessed countless business deals, charity galas, and empty dinners for one. Tonight, it cast its light on the most important conversation of Alexander's life, and watched it all fall apart. Amara sat rigidly in the antique chair, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The twins had fallen asleep in Alexander's study after he'd read them 3 bedtime stories, their small bodies curled together on his leather sofa like they belonged there. For a moment, watching them sleep, it felt like family. Now the silence stretched between Alexander and Amara like a chasm. "I've been thinking," Alexander said carefully, swirling the brandy in his crystal tumbler, "about the children's future, their education, their opportunities." "Here we go." Amara's voice was flat, resigned. She'd been waiting for this moment, dreading it. "I want to set up trust funds. The best private schools in Boston. Groton, Phillips Academy. Harvard's practically guaranteed with the right connections. I can open doors." "Stop." Amara stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "Just stop." Alexander blinked, startled by the fire in her eyes. "I'm trying to help them. To give them everything." "Everything you gave Ben?" The words cut like broken glass. A father who threw money at problems instead of showing up? A father who measured love in dollar signs. "That's not fair. Isn't it?" Amara's voice cracked with 3 weeks of suppressed emotion. "You want to know why Ben never told you about us? Why did he never bring me to your fancy dinner parties or introduce us at your country club?" Alexander's face paled. "Amara, because he was ashamed." The words erupted from somewhere deep and wounded. "Not of us, but of what you'd think, of what you'd say. My son, dating a black waitress from Roxbury with no college degree. He was terrified you'd look at me the way you looked at his other girlfriends, like I wasn't good enough for your precious family name." The brandy tumbler slipped from Alexander's numb fingers, shattering against the Persian rug. "That's not. I never." "You never what?" "Never made him feel like he had to choose between your approval and his happiness." Tears streamed down Amara's face, but her voice grew stronger. "He died rushing to meet you, Alexander. Rushing to tell you about us, because he finally found the courage to risk your disappointment. And you canceled on him. Again." The truth landed like a physical blow. Alexander stumbled backward, his face ashen. "You think I don't know that? You think I don't live with that every single day? I think you want to ease your guilt by playing grandfather to the children your son hid from you. I think you want to rewrite history by throwing money at us until we fit into your world. I want to take care of you." Alexander's voice broke. "All of you. I want to give them everything I failed to give Ben. They don't need your guilt money." Amara's voice rose dangerously close to waking the twins. "They need what Ben needs, a father who shows up, who chooses them over board meetings and social obligations, who loves them for who they are, not who he wants them to become." Alexander's hands shook as he reached for her. "I can be that. I can change." "Can you?" Amara stepped back, her eyes blazing with pain. "Because I've heard this before. From their biological father. From every man who promised my mother he'd stay. From Ben himself, swearing he'd find a way to bridge our 2 worlds. But when it came down to it, when the choice was hard, he chose your approval over our love. That's not what happened. Then where were you?" The question hung in the air like smoke. "Where were you when I was 8 months pregnant and scared? Where were you when I went into labor alone because Ben was at some business dinner he couldn't skip? Where were you when your grandchildren took their first steps, said their first words, cried for a daddy who would never come home? Alexander's legs gave out. He sank into his chair, looking older than his 63 years. I didn't know. God help me, I didn't know. Because you didn't try to know. Just like you never tried to know Ben. You knew his GPA, his business acumen, his networking skills. But did you know he volunteered at the Children's Hospital every Christmas? Did you know he sent half his salary to his college roommate's family when they lost their house? Did you know he carried pictures of the twins everywhere and talked about them to anyone who'd listen? Each revelation was a dagger to Alexander's heart. No, he whispered. I didn't know any of that. Of course you didn't. Because knowing would have required being present. And presence can't be bought, Alexander. It can't be delegated or scheduled between board meetings. Amara moved toward the study where the twins slept, her movements sharp with hurt and anger. Come on, babies. We're going home. Please. Alexander's voice was barely audible. Don't take them away from me. Not again. Amara paused in the doorway, her back to him. When she spoke, her voice was hollow with exhaustion. I'm not taking them away. You never had them to begin with. Just like you never had Ben. I loved him. I love them. I love. The words died in his throat. Love isn't enough, Alexander. Ben loved you too, but your love came with conditions. Mine doesn't. My children don't have to earn my affection or live up to some impossible standard. They don't have to be ashamed of who they are or where they come from. She gathered the sleepy twins, Zion mumbling protests as she lifted him. Say goodbye to Mr. Hartford, babies. Gwampa Alex, Zara whispered, reaching for him with trusting eyes. Alexander's heart shattered completely. He'd become Grandpa Alex in 3 perfect weeks. He'd learned that Zion loved dinosaurs and Zara preferred butterflies. He'd discovered that they both had Ben's stubborn streak and Amara's gentle heart. He'd found pieces of his son in their laughter, their curiosity, their unconscious gestures. And now he was losing them all over again. This doesn't have to end like this, he pleaded. Amara looked at him one last time, her eyes empty of hope. It ended the day your son died rushing to earn your love. We were just too naive to realize it. The front door closed with a finality that echoed through the empty mansion. Alexander stood alone in his perfect dining room, surrounded by the wreckage of crystal and dreams, listening to his heartbeat count the seconds of another beginning that had become an ending. Outside, the Boston skyline glittered like scattered diamonds, beautiful and cold and utterly indifferent to the way love could build a man up and tear him down in the span of 3 weeks. He had found his family and lost them in the same breath, and the silence that followed was deeper than any grave. The rain hammered against the windows of Alexander's Lewisburg Square mansion like accusations he could no longer ignore. 3 days had passed since Amara walked out of his life, taking his grandchildren and his last chance at redemption with her. The house felt like a mausoleum, 37 rooms of perfectly arranged emptiness, each corner echoing with the ghosts of what he'd lost. Alexander sat in Ben's old bedroom, untouched since his son had moved out at 18 after their final devastating fight. The Red Sox pennants still hung on the walls, faded now but stubbornly hopeful. On the nightstand, a photo of Ben grinning at Fenway Park. The same photo Amara had in her tiny Roxbury apartment, he realized now. They'd been there together, sharing joy Alexander had never bothered to witness. His phone buzzed. Another message from his lawyer. Another business crisis demanding his attention. Alexander looked at the screen and, for the first time in 40 years, turned it off completely. The silence was deafening. He pulled out the crumpled paper Amara had thrown at his feet, the hospital bill from the twins' birth, marked "paid in full" in Ben's handwriting. His son had emptied his trust fund account, the one Alexander had established for emergencies, to pay for his children's delivery. Ben had chosen love over money, sacrifice over comfort, presence over profit. Everything Alexander had failed to do. "God, Ben," he whispered to the empty room. "You were a better man than I ever was." The weight of his choices pressed down like the October sky, heavy, gray, suffocating. He thought of Zion's small hand slipping trustingly into his at the cemetery, of Zara's shy smile when she'd shown him her drawing. For one perfect week, he'd glimpsed what it meant to be needed, to be loved unconditionally, to be a grandfather. Now they were gone, lost to his pride and prejudice, and Amara's words echoed in his mind. "You think money fixes everything, but some things are too broken to buy." Across the city in Roxbury, Amara stared at the eviction notice taped to her apartment door. 3 days to pay $2,000 or find somewhere else to go. The twins slept fitfully on the pull-out couch, their small bodies curled together for comfort they no longer found in her arms. She'd been strong for so long, through Ben's death, through the pregnancy, through 2 years of 18-hour days and sleepless nights. But she was drowning now, pulled under by a current she couldn't fight alone. Mrs. Rodriguez from next door knocked softly. "Mija, you okay?" "We're fine," Amara lied, her voice muffled against her knees. "The kids heard you crying. Zion asked if the fancy man made you sad." Amara's heart clenched. In their innocent way, the twins had grown attached to Alexander during that brief, beautiful week. They'd asked for Grandpa Alex every day since, not understanding why he'd vanished from their lives as suddenly as he'd appeared. "He's not coming back, Mrs. Rodriguez." The older woman settled beside her on the front steps, her weathered hands gentle on Amara's shoulders. "Sometimes pride costs more than we can afford, Mija. Sometimes love means swallowing it. You don't understand. He thinks I'm just some gold digger who. What I understand is that those babies lost their daddy, and you lost the man you loved. Maybe that fancy man lost something too. Maybe he's sitting in his big house tonight, drowning in regret just like you." Amara wiped her eyes, tasting salt and sorrow. "It doesn't matter. We're from different worlds. Love doesn't see worlds, Mija. It sees hearts." Miles away in Cambridge, at Massachusetts General Hospital, Alexander stood outside the children's cancer ward where he'd been anonymously funding treatment for 3 years. He'd started the donations after Ben's death, pouring money into something that mattered instead of just accumulating more wealth. Mr. Hartford. Dr. Sarah Chen approached, surprised to see him in person rather than represented by lawyers and financial advisors. "I didn't expect." "I want to do more," Alexander said quietly. "Not just money. Time. Presence." Dr. Chen studied his face, the grief etched in every line, the desperate need for purpose. "We could always use volunteers. Reading to the children, playing games. Simple things that mean everything to them. Simple things. Like pushing twins on swings, like helping with homework, like being there when they needed him." "I'd like that," Alexander whispered. As he filled out volunteer paperwork, his hands trembled remembering Zara's small fingers teaching him to braid her doll's hair, Zion's excited chatter about dinosaurs and dreams. He'd had a family for 7 perfect days. Messy, complicated, beautiful family. And he'd thrown it away because he couldn't see past his own fears. His phone, turned back on for the first time in hours, buzzed with a text from his private investigator. Johnson family being evicted tomorrow. Mother turned down a job at Hartford Industries subsidiary. Said she wouldn't take charity. Thought you should know. Alexander's blood ran cold. Evicted. Amara and the twins, homeless because of his pride, his clumsy attempts to help that felt like pity. She'd rather lose everything than accept what she saw as condescension. But what if it wasn't charity? What if it was love? He stood in the hospital lobby, rain streaking the windows, watching families comfort each other through their darkest moments. A father reading to his sick daughter. A mother singing softly to her sleeping son. Love in action, not in bank transfers or business deals. For 40 years, Alexander had believed money was love, expensive gifts, trust funds, financial security. But Ben had known better. Ben was loved with his presence, his time, his full heart. Ben had shown up. Alexander pulled out his phone with shaking fingers, scrolling to a contact he'd saved but never called. Amara Johnson, Ben's love. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Hello. Her voice was thick with exhaustion and tears. Amara, it's Alexander. Please don't hang up. Silence stretched between them like an ocean of hurt. What do you want? She whispered. I want to apologize. For everything. For the things I said, the way I acted, the assumptions I made. His voice cracked. I want to help not because you need my money, but because I need you. I need Zion and Zara. I need to learn how to love the way Ben did. Alexander. I know I don't deserve another chance. I know I've been everything wrong with privilege and prejudice. But those children are my blood, and you were the love of my son's life, and I can't stand the thought of losing you again. Amara closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. I got the eviction notice. I know. And I know you won't take charity. So I'm not offering charity. I'm offering partnership. Help me turn Hartford Industries into something Ben would be proud of. Help me create programs for single mothers, for working families, for communities like yours that deserve investment, not pity. You don't understand how different our worlds are. Then teach me. Let me learn. Let me earn the right to be their grandfather, to be family. The word hung in the air between them, fragile as spun glass. I'm scared, Amara whispered. So am I. But I'm more scared of spending the rest of my life regretting this moment. Please, Amara, give me one more chance to show up. Through the phone, he heard her shaky breath, the sound of a heart wrestling with hope and fear. The twins miss you, she finally admitted. I miss them too. I miss all of you. More than I knew was possible. Another long pause. Then, so quietly he almost missed it. We're at 47 Walnut Street in Roxbury. Apartment 2B. Alexander was already reaching for his keys, his heart hammering with possibility and terror in equal measure. I'll be right there. As he ran through the rain toward his car, leaving behind the empty mansion and all its meaningless luxury, Alexander Hartford finally understood what his son had tried to tell him years ago. Love wasn't something you bought or earned or deserved. It was something you chose every day with your whole heart. And he was choosing it now, racing through the Boston night toward a tiny apartment in Roxbury where his real family was waiting. Hoping, maybe ready to forgive. The choice was made. Now came the hardest part. Proving he meant it. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the Hartford Mansion's breakfast room, casting golden light across the mahogany table where an unlikely family had gathered. Alexander watched from the doorway, still amazed by the transformation that had taken place, not just in his home, but in his heart. "Grandpa Alex, look." Zion held up a crayon drawing of stick figures holding hands. "It's our family." Alexander's chest swelled as he took the artwork, studying the careful details. A tall figure in a suit, him. A woman with kind eyes, Amara, and two small figures with big smiles, the twins. In the corner, barely visible but unmistakably there, was another figure with angel wings. "Ben's watching over us," Zara said matter-of-factly, pointing to the winged figure. "Mama says he sent you to us." Amara looked up from where she was making the twins' lunch, her eyes meeting Alexander's across the room. The wariness that had defined their early interactions had melted away, replaced by something deeper: trust, respect, and a love that had grown slowly but surely. "He did send me to you," Alexander said quietly, settling into his chair. "Or maybe you were sent to me." The past 6 months had been a journey neither of them could have imagined. After that first devastating encounter at the cemetery, Alexander had insisted on DNA tests, not from doubt, but from a desperate need to make everything legal, official, permanent. The results had confirmed what his heart already knew. Zion and Zara were Ben's children, his grandchildren, his second chance at being the father he should have been. The transition hadn't been smooth. Amara had initially refused his offers of help, proud and protective of the independence she'd fought so hard to maintain. But slowly, carefully, Alexander had proven himself, not with grand gestures or overwhelming generosity, but with presence. He showed up. He listened. He learned. He learned that Zion loved trains and could spend hours building elaborate tracks across the mansion's marble floors. He discovered that Zara had inherited Ben's artistic soul, filling sketchbook after sketchbook with drawings that captured emotions Alexander didn't even know he felt. He learned that Amara had dreams beyond waitressing. She'd been studying nursing at night before the twins were born, a goal she'd set aside but never abandoned. What does it mean to you when someone chooses to show up consistently in your life? Share a moment when presence meant more than presence. "Mrs. Chen called," Amara said, passing Alexander his coffee, black just how he liked it. Zara's painting was selected for the children's art exhibition at the Museum of Fine Arts. "That's wonderful." Alexander beamed at his granddaughter, who blushed and hid behind her cereal bowl. Ben would be so proud. They spoke of Ben often now, not with the sharp pain of fresh grief, but with the warm ache of cherished memories. Alexander had filled the house with photos. Ben as a baby, as a gangly teenager, as the young man who'd fallen in love with Amara Johnson and planned to marry her before fate intervened. The engagement ring Ben had bought still sat in Alexander's safe, waiting for the right moment. Maybe when the twins were older, he'd give it to Amara, not as pressure, but as proof of his son's love, evidence that their story had mattered. "Grandpa, will you come to my school for Grandfather's Day?" Zion asked around a mouthful of pancakes. "Wouldn't miss it," Alexander replied, meaning it with every fiber of his being. He'd attended every school event, every doctor's appointment, every bedtime story. The boardroom that had once consumed his life now felt like a stage set, important but not essential. His real work was here, in this kitchen, with these 3 hearts he'd been given to protect. Amara finished packing the twins' lunch bags, her movements efficient and graceful. She'd adapted to life in the mansion with characteristic determination, neither overwhelmed by the luxury nor diminished by it. She remained herself, strong, loving, fiercely protective of her children's well-being. "I have clinical rotations at Mass General today," she said, adjusting her nursing student uniform. Alexander had insisted on paying for her to return to school, and after months of stubborn refusal, she'd finally accepted. Not as charity, but as an investment in their family's future. "Nurse Mama." Zara clapped her hands. "You're gonna help sick people feel better. Just like Grandpa Alex helped us feel better," Zion added with the wisdom that sometimes surprised them all. Alexander felt his throat tighten. The child was right. In trying to heal his own broken heart by loving them, he had somehow found healing for wounds he didn't even know existed. The empty mansion that had echoed with loneliness now rang with laughter. The dining room where he'd eaten countless solitary meals now hosted tea parties and homework sessions. The library where he'd once brooded in silence was now filled with story time and gentle whispers of "Read it again, Grandpa." As Amara prepared to leave for classes and the twins got ready for school, Alexander found himself at the window, looking out at the garden where a new addition stood, a small playground, painted in bright colors that would have horrified his stuffy neighbors but delighted his grandchildren. "Daddy," he whispered to the morning air, using the word Ben had stopped calling him years ago. "I think I finally understand. Love isn't about being perfect. It's about being present." The doorbell rang, and Alexander smiled as he heard the twins race to answer it. Mrs. Rodriguez, their nanny, had arrived to walk them to the prestigious private school where they now attended kindergarten. Not because Alexander demanded it, but because they deserved every opportunity. But more than opportunities, they deserved what he was finally learning to give: unconditional love, daily presence, and the security of knowing they would never be alone. "We're ready," the twins chorused, appearing in matching backpacks and bright jackets. Amara kissed each of them goodbye, then surprised Alexander by pressing a gentle kiss to his cheek, a gesture that had evolved naturally over months of shared mornings and mutual respect. "Thank you," she whispered, as she did every day. "Thank you," he replied, as he did every day. Because gratitude was the foundation they'd built this unlikely family on. Gratitude for second chances, for love that transcends expectations, for children who teach adults how to hope again. After they left, Alexander walked slowly to his study, where Ben's photo sat prominently on his desk. But he didn't feel the crushing weight of regret anymore. Instead, he felt purpose. His phone buzzed with a text from Zion's teacher. He told the class his grandpa is his best friend. "Thought you should know." Alexander smiled, his eyes blurring with happy tears. 6 months ago, he'd been a broken man kneeling at a grave, consumed by guilt and loneliness. Today, he was a grandfather with finger-painted artwork covering his refrigerator, a son-in-law figure helping a remarkable woman achieve her dreams, and a man who finally understood what Ben had tried to tell him years ago. Real wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in moments. "I get it now, son," he whispered to Ben's photo. "I finally got it." Outside, Boston hummed with its usual energy, but inside the Hartford mansion, something precious had taken root. A family born not of blood alone, but of choice, sacrifice, and the kind of love that redeems even the deepest regrets. As Alexander prepared for another board meeting, he found himself looking forward not to the business discussions, but to the evening ahead. Homework help, dinner conversations, bedtime stories, and the sweet chaos of a house filled with the family he'd thought he'd lost forever. Ben had indeed sent them to each other. And in finding his grandchildren, Alexander had found himself. Have you ever experienced a second chance that completely transformed your life? What does family mean to you beyond blood relations? I'd love to hear your stories of unexpected blessings in the comments below. Thanks for sticking with this story till the very end. But trust me, you haven't seen anything yet. The next story is crazier, more shocking, and will blow your mind. Click the image on your screen now and dive right in. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss a single twist.